money, there's just a piece of paper. When you talk about money, when you earn money, it's more than you just giving me a piece of paper.
What are your thoughts on that in terms of manifestation or writing these affirmations or writing your goals or things like that?
Manifestation is one thing, writing down your goals is one thing, writing down your wins is one thing. Social connection. If you own a perfect island, but if you don't have like people around you, you're gonna suffer heavily.
Often people say that building is important and you should have something of your own and work towards having multiple failures so that you can wear the crown of success once. To prove all of that right and ensure that building something of your own, building your profile, having these multiple ideas and experiences, we have an amazing guest with us today, Mr. Sankalp Garud, or I'd say Dr. Sankalp now, is because he has completed his postdoc from University of Oxford, officially a neuroscientist, is building his own startup. He loves to talk about emotional intelligence and he has his own podcast, which is Understanding Emotions. And he talks about emotional intelligence, neuroscience. So it's great to have you with us for this episode of Founders Across Borders. What made you choose neuroscience as a field is something I'd love to know.
Well, Yukta, first of all, thanks for having me. That was a lovely introduction. And yeah, I'm a doctor now. I study neuroscience. I studied that for my PhD, psychology and neuroscience. And now I started as a neuroscientist at Oxford. So I'm more of a postdoc working in science, neuroscience, etc. The question was why I started neuroscience, right? And it's like quite a intriguing thing. When I was relatively young, which is during my undergrad, I had this question, which is like, what is the most important thing that humanity faces right now? What problem is worth solving? And I thought that happiness and suffering is our most important problem. Like we have all sorts of material abundances in this world, and of course there's sections of the world that doesn't have that, but given that we are talking here, we have an internet connection, generally food and shelter, those things are taken care of. But yet it's not the case that just because you have material abundance that you become happy, right? Like there's more to happiness and well-being, and somehow we can still suffer while having a lot of abundance materially. So I was like, what's happening here? And I was like, okay, we need to understand what's happening in the mind. Like psychology is where it's at. That's the next big thing to solve. And so I was like, okay, let's study psychology and the mind from all possible angles. And neuroscience is probably one of the most solid, concrete angle that you could look at when it comes to psychology, emotions, happiness.
Absolutely. I have been following Andrew Huberman on his podcast for quite some time now. Being a neuroscientist, I think it's a well-known name in the house for in this space. So, and he talks a lot about biohacking, longevity, psychology, and he's interviewed some one of the greatest minds and authors who are in the space of neuroscience. So, what do you think about all the discussions that are happening right now for psychology in terms of brain hacking, biohacking, or longevity? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm all up for it. In fact, it's uh, one of my three core pillars. If I think about, what are like three things I should focus on in terms of personal life, not in terms of my work. Like one is, of course, emotional intelligence, growth, that sort of thing. The other thing is more like social connection. And the third thing, when it comes to health, it's actually longevity and biohacking and so on. In fact, one of the guests of my podcast, one of the recent guests was Brian Johnson, who's, this so-called
Yes,
biohacker,
the
world's healthiest
biohacker.
person,
Yes, yes.
whatnot. Yeah, so I did talk to him for a bit, and yeah, it's something that I try to focus on. So I, try to eat well in a way that optimizes for longevity, supplements, whatnot. A long video on YouTube also on all sorts of these sort of things. I think without getting into too much nitty-gritties, then you're welcome to ask me any specifics. But I think in general, it's something that we should be focusing on. Now, everyone will differ on how extreme they want to go with it. So some people are like all in and spend millions on it. But, just having good meals every day, that also is a level of biohacking. And I think everyone should be on that spectrum somewhere.
So I have this interesting question because I do consume a lot of podcasts and I see people talking about a few things if you improve in your lifestyle, that is your path to becoming a millionaire. So do you think that when we talk about success or money, in someone's life, and when you try to attach it to the lifestyle or the psychology of someone, are they interrelated or they are independent, or it's a Venn intersection? What is it about?
Yeah. So is the question like, is there any role of psychology or mindset when it comes to your success or money? And is that what you're trying to get at?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I think okay, so the first question would be like, is there any evidence that, there's anything about your psychology that can lead to money? And I think the answer to that is a no. At least I don't know of any direct study that measures that. But having said that, there's obviously a lot of anecdotal evidence. Like if you enroll in any get rich quick or a get rich course or business course and what have you, and I mean the legitimate ones, not just like snake oil, they would talk about mindset a lot, right? And there's like
Right, right, right.
so I think it seems to me that there are things like, confidence, which seems very logical that this would have an impact on how much you earn, especially if you're in a job that does require some sort of public facing slash selling. I think in that case, I'm pretty sure that personality traits like confidence and your growth mindset and things like that might be quite useful. I don't necessarily think there's a relationship between how good you are as a person and the money you make. Your morality and your income is not necessarily, I think, related, because you find plenty of people who are rich but can be very difficult to live with or talk
Right,
to.
right.
And then at the same time, we all know people who are not making that much money, but they are like a treat to be around. And we know that they work hard for their families, treat their children well. So I think maybe when you talk about morality, maybe that's not as connected there.
So, what is your opinion on the book Psychology of Money?
Hmm. I think I read it like long, long ago, so I don't even, or maybe I just read a different one. I'm actually not even sure what it talks about. So if you want to tell me its thesis, I can give my comments on it, but I don't
So
have a
it's a
recollection of
book
what it
by
says.
Morgan Housel that talks about how like, because I've seen so many people talk about the millionaire mindset and be like, if you know about your brain, if you're biohacking, that's your gateway to success. And maybe
Mhm.
like that's part one of it. And yes, the book talks about the relationship that someone has with like money in terms of how do they like invest, and how basically the mindset should be of someone if they're investing or if they're trying to do something, or
Yeah,
even like if they're trying to take debt. So it has like 20 chapters, and each chapter has a
yeah,
different conversation and independent chapters. But yeah, that's more where the book all about.
yeah. I mean, again, I can't comment on the specifics because either I've just not read the book or I've read long ago. But I think the general idea that there has to be some link between your mindset and the amount you make seems likely true.
Hmm.
With this, there's this thing in we look in psychology a lot. It's called the sense of agency that you feel. Like, do you feel you're an agent in this world, or you just feel like things happen to you? Like the pop culture version of this is: are you a victim, or are you like a creator, or are you
Right.
are you like, are you helpless in this world? Learned helplessness is this another phenomenon which is related. And I think it makes sense to me that these things would correlate with your income, or just how much you produce. Perhaps is a better one. And at the same time, money, if you think of what money is, it's or success is, especially if it's measured through money, this idea that it's a series of fictional transactions, right? Money, there's just a piece of paper. So what happens when
Right.
you talk about money, when you earn money, is more than you just giving me a piece of paper, right? And so all of that happens in people's minds. It doesn't happen in your bank account, or doesn't happen in your wallet, because ultimately what the wallet is holding is a stack of paper and a stack of plastic, which is your cards. So to truly understand money, therefore, you have to understand what are the stories that we are telling ourselves with regards to money. And the key story with money tends to be like, hey, look, you give me something and then I owe you something. And there's this sense of reciprocity that it creates. Of course, it could, on the more negative side, all of this was great and positive when you're creating something, but you could also equally be a bad actor and then not create something and still indulge in that exchange. So that could be like unethical marketing, might be an example of that, or pure coercion or robbery and things like that. Yeah, I think to be able to understand money is a lot to do with psychology. I'm pretty sure of that.
Wow, that's quite interesting. Which makes me understand, like when you work across psychology, how much or what is the role of subconscious mind? Because there have been books like Power of Our Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy, and almost so many self-help books also talk a lot about the practicing of the principle of subconscious mind. So scientifically, what is it about?
Sure. So the idea of the unconscious, the subconscious, it's something that came with these early creators of psychology and psychotherapy like Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and so on. And I think the key insight was there are things in your mind that are not easily accessible to you. Like, therefore, it's unconscious or subconscious. And those words are used relatively interchangeably. So that was like the history, the creation of it. In science as it stands today, subconscious is not a concept that is used a lot. And the reason for that is a lot of science these days is, or psychology these days is very scientific. It's very hardcore science. And if you can't observe it, then it doesn't exist. So, there has to be evidence to see it. It's not just enough to create this theoretical concept. So I think it's fine as long as we're talking about, it's theoretically how we understand ourselves. Of course, there are things about me that I might not be as conscious of or aware of. And that makes sense. But at the same time, there's no part of the brain, let's say, where something unconscious is stored. Like we haven't found anything like that. So that distinction is more of a conceptual distinction rather than something that we have found in the brain, let's say. Now, having said all of that doesn't mean it's not useful. It is fine and perhaps even useful to think of, training your unconscious or training your mind. And I think there's also this idea of sleep, which is a huge mystery, right? Like we know for sure that sleep leads to better learning and memory and things like that. So if you haven't had a bad night's sleep, then that's not a good idea if you try to learn something. And we see a lot of students, like trying to cram things, stay up all night. And that's actually not a good idea if you want to prioritize cognitive flexibility, effort, learning, all of that stuff. So I think I'm just giving you a long-winded answer to say it's probably useful to think of subconscious mind, and you could
Yeah,
do all
right.
these affirmations, meditations, and all not. And of course, I'm personally a fan of meditation myself. But at the same time, since you asked about science, I think we need to be aware that these terms come from like a more theoretical, conceptual conception of psychology, as opposed to something we have found in the brain, which largely we haven't.
So all these manifestation, affirmation coaches, the people who say that we help you elevate your life by doing this, and that, and of course, they do not have a scientific degree attached to the credentials, but might have some social proof. So, what are your thoughts on that in terms of manifestation or writing these affirmations or writing your goals, all things like that? Do they have any impact, or it's just a voodoo thing that's going on?
Yeah, yeah. I think as far as science goes, so first of all, there's a lot of things, right? Manifestation is one thing, writing down your goals is one thing, writing down your wins is one thing. There's many practices you could do, and journaling, and they all have different levels of evidence to support them. As far as manifestation goes, I don't think there's any evidence around that. Which is again not to say it's not useful. It could be, I suppose, but at least science-wise, there's no evidence there. But journaling and writing down even your goal, perhaps, which may be a form of journaling, I think there is some evidence there, especially when it comes to trauma and healing your past, and even perhaps feeling better on a day-to-day level, like mood logging, journaling, writing down your wins, which can lead to self-esteem. I think those things definitely have some amount of evidence attached to them.
So, over the, I mean, what I'd love to know, what are the myths that you would like to debunk in this current industry? I mean, of course, you're aware of what people have been talking about, and they talk about it. This is the brain capacity, and then so many things are out there. So, since you're a neuroscientist and you know the logic or back everything with facts, so what does the myth debunking look like in this space?
Yeah, I mean, there's like plenty of myths out there. I think one of them you mentioned, which is like we only use a certain part of your brain, a certain percentage of your brain. All of that is largely not true. All of your brain is always on and always working to help you do stuff, and even in sleep, a large it's still consolidating memories. There's a bit of a garbage collector function that sleep does. Like there's a lot of toxins that build up in your mind or in your brain rather, and sleep does function as to eliminate those toxins. So there's the brain is always on. Is one way to say it. And then there's, I suppose, other myths like the fact that sleep is not important is another big cultural myth that we have. And I think, as far as we know, sleep is probably the most important thing you could ever do for your health, your productivity, for your learning. Like name whatever you want in life, and it's almost always aided by sleep. So that's another one. Um, yeah, I suppose those are the ones that come to mind. Do you have any other specific questions or any areas that you think of that come to your mind when you think of myths around neuroscience?
For me, it's always been like I've seen so many people talk about different things in terms of so there's a book called as Mindset by Carol S. Dweck, which she talks about the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset, and we have both of them in ourselves. It depends on us as to what do we do of it. So that's one thing. But I think she's I think postdoc at Stanford University, so that has credibility attached to it. But I'm still unsure as to so many people who just talk about the miracle theory. Like there's a book which I read called as Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. So it talks about the principle of autosuggestion, which says that, okay, there was a child who was deaf, and his father used to every day tell him that you can hear things, and he used to empower him with all his belief. And scientifically,
Hmm.
he could not hear anything. So he was like deaf. But yes, with time, he has some sensations. He could start responding about a few things. God knows how did he gain those senses, I'd say. And yes, if the story talks about how he ended up supporting and becoming an affiliate for one of the largest companies for auditory help, which helped him hear clearer. So you listen to all these stories and then you listen to the science behind it. So sometimes I feel it's a mismatch. So yeah, I'd like to get to know more
Yeah,
about it.
I think that's a great area to get into, and it's like it's a very beautiful and interesting and complicated area to just dive into. So here's a few things to motivate this area and this discussion. There is so first of all, we talked about mindset, right? Like Carol Dweck's work. And that definitely has a lot of science behind it. And there's, of course, people who have criticized the science, but that's part of science. Criticism about science is part of science. But she has a large corpus of work that shows mindset effects. So when you have a growth mindset, it does tend to be associated with better things generally, be it grades, be it artistic output or creative output, whatever. So that's definitely the case. The other thing that is definitely the case also is this thing called the placebo effect, which means you can cure illnesses by just giving people sugar pills, as long as it is framed in a way that it is not of sugar pills. So if you have two groups with the same ailment and you give one set of group a real medication and the other set of group a placebo, there's lots of people in the placebo group who will also improve, which is interesting, right? Because how does that happen? There's nothing, no medication there. And the third thing is something called as hypnosis. And when people think of hypnosis, they think of like this some weird guy sitting and waving his pendulum and
Right.
hypnotizing a naive subject. And that's unfortunate because that's become like the pop culture image of hypnosis. But hypnosis is very powerful. It's used as a therapeutic technique very successfully. People stop smoking after hypnotherapeutic techniques.
Right.
Uh, a lot of athletes use it for high performance. So before you go to a field, you sort of hypnotize. Either someone does it to you or you do it yourself, and then that helps performance. And so when you talk about these incidents of like faith healing is the
Hmm.
general category where it comes about. I think it's a mixture of some of it is this sort of placebo hypnosis type suggestion type effects, which indeed are true and they do happen, and a lot of nonsense as well. So they're not healing, but there's just some illusion that's created that some healing is happening. So, for example, a very good entertaining source for this is this magician slash psycho illusionist. He calls himself called Darren Brown. Have you heard that name?
I think I have, yes.
Yeah, so Darren has a lot of shows. It's on YouTube or elsewhere where he tries to replicate these miracles that these faith healers, etc., purport to show, and
Hmm.
then he is able to achieve all of that. But the catch is, it's not a miracle. Like you could still explain it what's happening. So, for example, if a blind is able to see, the
Hmm.
the key there might be, most people are not fully blind actually. Like most people who are classified as blind can still see shades of light and dark and so on. So if you make something obviously light and dark, they will be able to see some movements. And then, okay, the faith healer then says that, look, this is a miracle. Someone is cured fully. But really what has happened is nothing. They're still at the same level of vision that they were before.
Hmm.
There's a lot of nuance there. I don't think there's like miracle in the sense of someone who has like a broken arm will grow a new arm or something like that. But at the same time, it's demonstrable that psychological beliefs can lead to physical changes in the body. And as a result, there could be improvements in symptoms or improvement in your lifespan. So one of the things we know is people who are more connected socially, they have a longer lifespan. Now that could purely be a correlation, but it could not be. And there's other evidence to suggest that people who are connected also have better immune health and so on. So larger point being your psychology can influence your health and physiology rather. It's there's certainly something there. It's just not as miraculous or supernatural as some people might want you to believe.
So, someone who is exploring therapy or wants to go for therapy, I am not sure if any of the therapists goes for postdoc or like go for their PhDs, but they're helpful. So,
Mhm.
how would you differentiate between the concepts that a therapist knows versus the concepts that a neuroscientist knows? What's the difference? It's
Yeah, I
psychology
think
in the end. That's what I feel.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. First of all, neuroscience is not the same as psychology, right? So neuroscience is talking about the brains, is more focused on the mind and cognition and so on. Now, I do happen to work in like sort of the intersection of both sides, could hopefully speak to both areas. But like a pure neuroscientist, like 100% neuroscientist, not unlike, um, I think Andrew Huberman is actually one of those. They would be more on the side of cellular structure, or more on the physiological side,
Hmm.
like neurons and glia and how they talk and plasticity and so on. Whereas I tend to be more on the psychology slash cognitive side, which is, mental health and social connection and so on. And how does the brain involved in that? So, and that is totally different from a psychotherapist whose main job is to work with clients. Like I don't directly work with clients. My job is to do research. So my job is to find out new things about the brain or cognitive constructs. And I know about psychotherapy mainly out of my personal interest. I don't know about it necessarily as my training. And so the job of the psychotherapist is simply to administer psychotherapy. And as long as they are helpful, I think that's the only thing that matters from my perspective. Now, will it help if they know about the brain? I think so.
Hmm.
But is it a requirement? I don't think so.
So, since you've been researching for so many years,
Mhm.
and you love discovering new things as a part of your daily gig. What
Mhm.
was your thesis about? What was some groundbreaking research that you figured out when you became a neuroscientist?
Yeah, I mean, this is like 5 years of my life. And I think so. What was it about? It was about social connection. If I were to speak like in plain terms, it was about how friendships start, how new relationships start. So I was quite keen on looking at like the initial phase of social connection. Now, something to know is like when you do a PhD, you're rarely working on something super big. What you're working on is something super specific and super niche. And the reason for that, it's hard to make discoveries when you're just thinking too broad. Like you have to go
Right,
deep into something,
right,
right? So I mean, I'm not sure if it's groundbreaking in that sense. Like it's not probably going to change people's life just because I did something
right.
and not something immediate. Like science is a very long-term sport you play. So, something that someone discovered ages ago might be relevant now today. So if you look at all the AI stuff, which is new today, AI
Hmm.
didn't start this year or last year, whereas the hype about AI was mostly 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes.
But all the AI, deep learning, even deep learning, which is the most relevant technology with ChatGPT and things like that, was still decades in the making. So this is the kind of thing I do here. It's which is like trying to sow the seeds for a deeper understanding of the mind and the brain. But anyway, but more specifically, I studied social connection, how it starts, how it relates to your mental health. So, for example, loneliness and things like that. And then what parts of the brain make it happen. So, we were looking at some very deep parts of the brain which are not looked at a lot, really. And so, very few people have looked at these deep parts, mostly because we don't find MRI scanners that are strong enough to look at these parts. And luckily, at Oxford, we have this luxury of having a very strong magnet with which you can look at these very deep parts of the brain. So we were looking at these parts and seeing how they lead to friendship formation and so on. So we discovered some parts of the brain that are relevant, which we did not know before, which are important for social connection.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. I'd love to know. I think the startup that you're building is also somewhere on these lines about social connection, and you did mention about a few events and things like that. So, would you like to talk some more or share some more about that?
Yeah, sure. So the business slash the startup, which is separate from my role from Oxford, I'm actually uh, I have to be careful because it's something I need to maintain that when I do the startup, I'm not infringing on the Oxford role, and it is separate. With that, my idea was, all of this theoretical work that I'm doing at Oxford and the research, it's wonderful, but it's not immediately applicable. And at the same time, I know that there's some other things that I've done, like meditation, therapy, coaching, which have had huge impacts on how I feel on a day-to-day level, nutrition and biohacking and that kind of thing. So I wanted to create a space where I could talk about these things and talk about how to improve our lives on a day-to-day level. So personal growth is probably the umbrella term. I like to call it emotional intelligence because I want to focus on the mind. I want to be explicit that, the mind is my main target of interest or region of interest. So that's my intention with the business, which is to create communities because, hey, I know social connection is important both for my PhD, but also for my day-to-day life.
Right.
And to create communities in person. So we are building this graduate network thing which connects people from across different universities in major cities around the world. We're starting with London. So that's like the more in-person aspect of it. And more online, I'm building this emotional intelligence community where right now I'm offering like a monthly call that I do, and we just discuss, or I teach, I suppose, a little bit of emotional intelligence, and then we try to apply it. And it's very low effort because it's just once a month. As it's just launching right now, it's not even fully launched, so it's very much in the initial stage. But yeah, that's the idea, to grow the emotional intelligence
Yeah,
of the world and
that's
doing it in
beautiful.
communities.
Yeah, but since you're talking so much about emotional intelligence, and of course, like IQ, most of the people I see talk about EQ is the next big thing, and IQ would take you to this place, and EQ would take you to a different. Like if you want to climb corporate ladder or business ladder, do something, you need to be sharp at EQ. How would you define EQ in terms of? I mean, of course, I know the basic definition, but how, in terms of like science, do you define emotional quotient and emotional intelligence? And according to you, how would you identify if someone is emotionally aware or they're not?
Yeah. So with EQ or emotional intelligence broadly, I have tried. So there's no like standardized answer to that. Right? There's no one thing that is EQ,
Absolutely,
be
absolutely.
it from a science perspective. So from my perspective, what I've tried to do is create my own framework around emotional intelligence, which is so personally I've like spent it up to right from like meditation retreats to therapy and coaching and all of that and the formal science. I was like, I'm in this unique position to create a framework which tries to encapsulate what EQ is. And this is not scientific, it's more like a framework, like it's a fragment of my thought, but it's helpful, as I said. And what I've done is identify 5 factors that go into EQ, like 5 step framework. One of them is how much compassionate you are to yourself. So self compassion, because we can be our own worst critics sometimes. Well, not sometimes, quite often, in fact. Like we're very easy to be harsh on ourselves, but we can extend compassion for others who are in similar situations. So self compassion is one big component. There is identity and core beliefs. So what do I think do I think I have high self esteem? Do I think I'm like an agent in the world? Do I think the world is a friendly place? All of these are core beliefs that are important for emotional intelligence. The third thing is something like focus. Like, where's my attention placed? Like, am I scrolling on social media and just thinking, oh, look, she looks so much more attractive than I do, or look, he's so much wealthier, or whatever the thing we get
Right.
spinned up by.
Notions we have,
And do we
yes.
have control over our focus? Are we mindful? So all of that is that factor. Another one I have is called action. So sometimes we can just get too bogged down in these conceptual thinking and just stay in our armchairs. But emotional intelligence requires you to be in the world. Like, there's no point in just writing in a journal only. Like, journaling is helpful, don't get me wrong, but you need to go out there and learn how to talk and connect, and all of that is part of emotional intelligence. And in fact, healing only happens when you go outside. Like, shame is something that we create with respect to others. Like, there's no shame if you're just alone in the world. And the other one is clarity. Like, just do you have clarity about what's happening? Are you aware of your emotion? Or, that's like the first step almost. Like, if you just don't know you're angry, then
Hmm.
we cannot talk about how to mitigate anger and how to manage it. Like, there's no point about all of that. You just don't even know what's happening. So clarity, and but do you know where you're going? Like, having a compelling future is one of the most strongest thing you could do for yourself in terms of motivation and happiness
Things
and
like that, yeah.
yeah, energy. So though that is like my 5-step framework. If you add health and social connection to it, I think it becomes like a complete thing. But
Complete.
purely in terms of emotional intelligence, that's those are the 5 things I think.
How much do you think clarity in term? I know clarity is important, but someone who has been struggling with clarity or did not know what's going on, how would you recommend they should solve this problem of clarity and then momentum?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And first of all, it's worth saying that it's also normal to not have clarity, right? Like you can only have clarity, but preceding that, there will be a stage of non-clarity. Right? No one is born with clarity, so there's
Right,
obviously
right, right.
a phase and learning curve there to be careful of. But I think every person in this planet is unique, right? So there's no one thing, obviously, that anyone will pursue or everyone will pursue rather. So I think it's like a process, like so to discover what clarity would be for you is to discover you fully.
Hmm.
And there's ways, like if you just want me to give you like a toolkit, and obviously there are things like meditation or journaling, which I'm sure you know about. But at the same time,
Absolutely.
it's not just about the tools, right? There's something more to it. Because if it's just about the tool, everyone would have clarity. So I think it comes from like connecting with the version of you that is the best version of you, for lack of a better word, but also like more energized, more inspired version of you. So what I call it like is what does my compelling future look like? Do I even have a compelling future? And that is not to say are you objectively high status or something. So just because I am in Oxford and you'll get a good job and what, that's not what I mean by compelling future. What I mean is when I tune into my future self, do I feel like, wow, this is a life worth living? Like, wow, this makes me energized. Like that is what I mean. So for some people it might mean doing science. For some people it might be like more of an artistic pursuit and they might not even want to go to college. There's no one path for it. But it's
Hmm.
in tuning into that energy of feeling like you have something to look forward to.
Yeah, in layman language, I'll say like hope
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah, but
make
hope
it
is
like,
like
yeah.
hope can be a bit like, there's an uncertainty about it. What clarity is more like figuring out what that energy signature looks like for you. What is the emotional state, for example, of someone who is you 5 years from now, let's say, for example. And we want to tune into that emotional state. That is what I mean by clarity. Clarity is really clarity of mind, and understanding our own minds fully.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense when I try to decode it. And then to understand, I'm assuming that since you've been working globally with so many people, and I think Oxford is one of the most diverse places in the UK, how has that diverse experience shaped you and shaped your research?
Yeah, yeah. I think I've had the privilege of being in very diverse environments right from my undergraduate, which is a long time now. Oxford is very unique in the sense that there's a lot of international crowd, unlike many cities. And in that way, you are always constantly exposed to different cultures, different backgrounds, and that is always very enriching. It's very easy to get into this framework of my way is the highway. But when you see people doing things which are different, you have to step back and learn tolerance, and you have to learn non-judgmentalness and things like that, and you have to learn humility. You have to learn that your way is not the main way and not the only way. And I think that is something that diversity teaches you. And in terms of like productivity and work, what I think is more important even than demographic diversity is viewpoint diversity. Like, can you come up with ideas independently and can you share those ideas, or are we just all thinking in the same way, right? Because if you're all thinking in the same way, then that's a disservice to research. That's a disservice to innovation, because by definition, innovation involves thinking outside the box. And so it's also equally, perhaps more important, is to have viewpoint diversity. And that I think that extends to not just science, but it also extends to like demographics and politics and democracy and politics and so on. And I think viewpoint diversity is equally important in how we function as society in general. So yeah, it's quite important.
Do you think like how evolution plays a key role into what we think, what we do? Is Charles Darwin's book about evolution still relevant in the current syllabus of learning neuroscience as major?
Yeah, extremely, extremely relevant. The thing with evolution is it's like gravity. Like, sure, it was discovered like long ago, gravity, but that doesn't mean it stops being relevant, right? Suddenly we don't start floating up. and levitating towards the sky. Right? That doesn't happen. And so the phenomenon of evolution is always happening, and it's always there, much like gravity. You can think of like magnetism or so on. There's like many analogies to that. The book itself, I'm not sure if everyone needs to read the book or anything like that. It's probably not as important, and the language is a bit archaic, terse, a bit boring, if I may. But it's also very interesting as a science enthusiast to see what Darwin actually wrote, not just what we, all the crystallized versions that we know of now. But yeah, evolution, simply put, is super important. Even in neuroscience, on a day-to-day basis, we are always looking at how evolutionarily conserved the brain is. So if you look at a monkey brain versus a human brain, like a large section of it is very similar. Like the only small differences, like of course the anatomy is different and it's a different brain, don't get me wrong. But you could look at a monkey brain and find what's called homologous regions, which is like similar functioning regions in the human brain. And you could go like really down and find similar brain structures even in reptiles and so on. So yeah, evolution is more important than ever, and we are part of this organism journey, right from the single cell to more complex forms, and we are part of that, and evolution is the key theory that grounds our part in that.
I have read about reptilian brain. I don't know if you talk that. I mean, in layman language, that's what I've read. That might be some different term scientifically. So to not offend the science within you or the scientist within you. So it does talk about like the reptilian brain, the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex, and I forgot there are four layers to it. There's prefrontal, neo, reptilian is the last. There's one on the third side. Like I don't know what you call it. Do you know what it calls?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're referring to, what's called the triune brain theory, which is like there's three rough parts of the brain: the outer part, the middle part, and the inner part. Inner part being the reptilians, the outer part being more of the prefrontal cortex and the cortex and so on. It was actually a legitimate theory. I think we don't, the neuroscience don't think of that as much, and there's definitely no part of the brain which is more reptilian, or rather, there's no part of the brain which we call the reptilian brain. But at the same time, there's, as I said, the correct scientific way to think about it, I suppose, or at least what we do right now, is to think of homologies, quote unquote, which is to say similar functioning regions. And that is definitely true and very scientifically grounded. There are parts of the brain in us that are shared across multiple mammals and beyond. Things
Hmm.
like the fear structure, often called the amygdala, which does much more than fear, by the way, but it does look at fearful faces, and you will find similar structures in other species like the macaque monkeys and so on. The part of the brain I investigated for my PhD is what's called the dorsal raphe nucleus. The inspiration we got to look at that region came from macaque monkeys and studies in macaque monkeys. Yeah, there are parts of the brain that are shared across multiple species.
So next time, if I call some human a monkey, they should not be offended at all.
Again, sorry.
If I call a human a monkey, the next time they should not be offended.
Well, yeah, depends on the human.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah. I was taking a lecture today, and that's what I talked about. I said that when you're prompting for AI, you're writing about AI, the reason that you get, because AI is a mirror of what you feed. So if you think that AI is not giving you answers, it's because you're prompting like monkeys. So you have to stop prompting like monkeys because it's not a monkey. We evolved from a monkey, AI did not. AI came from the
Hmm.
prefrontal cortex. So
Hmm.
from better. And that analogy was like a good one towards the end of the class when they were like, yeah, we won't ever prompt like monkeys. I said, you got it.
Love it, love it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. AI is quite fascinating, isn't it? It's just like a beast that we've not known. Like, what does it mean for this piece of silicon to be so smart? And yeah, it's something that we think about every day because it's deeply connected to neuroscience. And yeah, I'm very excited to see what AI does and where it progresses. Something I'm keeping the pulse on.
Absolutely. And since we're talking about building things borderless, I'd love to understand this one aspect and which is since you completed you are right now working at Oxford and I believe you have Indian origins as well. So do you believe that India as a country has scope of producing neuroscientists from its current educational infrastructure? I know it's quite opposite of what we've been talking about, but this conversation did spike my interest into that area to touch upon.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was recently listening to a talk by an Ames doctor who was doing neuroscience research. So there is research happening in India, there's no doubt. It's just not a lot. And it's probably not also of a very high impact. Again, there are individual researchers who might be, but as a in general, on average, I think that's a true statement to make. And I think the reason for that is a lot of research depends on funding. Like what I'm doing is not free. Like I just talked about using like the strong magnet. What I did not say is the strong magnet costs about like, in terms of rupees, like 70,000 rupees or so per hour, or dollars, whatever, $700 an hour or something.
Yeah, right, right, right.
And if you're just talking 1 hour, like a research is not 1 hour, it's usually tens of hours, if not hundreds. So this sort of money is just not invested. Like you could say the government is not prioritizing it, or there's no additional funding. You can blame whoever you'd like, but the fact of the matter is that this sort of funding is not available in India. If you see what a PhD does in India in psychology slash neuroscience, it's like maybe like 10 to 20 to 30 subjects. The clinicians have more access to this because they get a reason to scan brains, because there's like clinical reason and you could fund it
Right, right, right,
through
right,
some
right.
other ways. But like pure research is even harder. I've had a recent family member who's doing a psychology slash cognitive science PhD, and they're like equally smart as I am, but the problem is there's just not enough funding, so you can't be very ambitious. Like if you look at AI, it's not cheap to do AI. There's If you want to train models, it's one of the more expensive things these days. Research does, for better or worse, depend a lot on funding, which is why you see all the funding cuts happening in America having huge consequences on research.
Yeah, a lot of professors are now suffering, and Harvard is fighting a different kind of battle now. So,
Exactly. So, um, yeah, science is great, but science is expensive. It's a very expensive sport. It's on the order of millions in years, like a 5 to 10 year span is what you need for like good studies to happen, like 2 or 3 good studies, let's say. Um, and if I look at my PhD, hundreds of thousands have gone into it in funding. So that is the key problem with, I think, countries like India, where just not enough money there in research. Mhm, mhm. I think it depends on what you're doing. Like, what is the task? Like, if it's like a purely cognitive number crunching task or something, I would probably um, trust the person with high IQ, right? Like, but I think it's worth stepping back, and I think reality is not as unidimensional or bidimensional, right? The mind is not as simple, and sometimes it's helpful to have these measures, but on the other hand, I think it's not very useful as well. So I think what we do know is different people have different capacities and proclivities. So, there are plenty of people who are my colleagues who are way more dedicated to science than I am. And it's not because I am, let's say, not good enough or whatever. It's just because their mindset is so well suitable for these some sort of a thing that they're very happy to lock themselves in a room for days. Whereas for me, I also care about, let's say, social connection and being social and keeping my health active. And that inevitably means that I'm going to organize my life slightly differently. Right. And so I think the way I think about IQ, EQ, all of these things is we just have different strengths and weaknesses. We are different humans, and we're going to, as a result of that, do different things. So I think it's more important to find the right avenue for your expression than it is to just be like comparing these two dimensions in the abstract. Yeah, let's go. Let's go. Oh, neuroscience in the world. Well, I'm very biased to Oxford. I don't know if it's objectively the best. I'm going to say Oxford because I can't think of, but it's rapid fire. I'm not going to think too much, but it's probably not Oxford. It's the real answer. Yeah. I don't think of favorites as much in terms of writing, but I think Viktor Frankl's book Man's Search for Meaning is quite powerful. So I'm not sure if favorite is the right word, but it's a great book and well written. Yeah. I would say driven, perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. I've never tried that before. Social connection any day of the week. Yeah, so if you have like a luxurious, even if you own a perfect island, but if you don't have like people around you, you're gonna suffer heavily. I think since we're on social connection, the thing that comes to mind is I would probably say to my younger self to prioritize social connection a bit more. Coming from India, of course, there's this whole like exceptional emphasis on academics, right? And I think it's. I mean, I don't know if it's good or bad or whatever. I'm definitely what I am in large part because of the effort I took back then. But at the same time, I don't think it needed to be that extreme, and there was room for social connection, and it's at least not actively avoiding social connection. There's lots of things about, like let's say you don't go to parties because of course you have to study, right? That sort of a narrative. I think that can be a bit harmful to overall health. And I think they both can pretty coexist pretty well. Yeah. So that's what I would do. Probably just prioritize more of the social connection and confidence. I think I had to do a lot of work later in life to build confidence. And I think it would have saved me if I had been more social before. Hmm. I think it is something to the order of, like not being able to turn off pain. And I think pain itself is fine, but it's like when you have helplessness and if you're not have control over it, that can be very, very much a problem. So I think there's this lack of agency over pain or negative feelings and things like that. It's just like the inability to do so is, I think it's brutal. Yeah, honestly, generally, I'm very grateful about my life and try to remind myself. So it's hard to say anything along those lines, I suppose. I think the answer is just whatever, like just continue getting good sleep and all of that. Really, I think that's the only. Sometimes it gets a bit too. Sometimes I work till late or whatever, and then sometimes I miss out on sleep, and I just don't want to make those trade-offs. Things try to prioritize sleep. Yeah. Sure. I mean, since we've been talking about emotional intelligence, let's go with emotional intelligence. So basically, I did start with that, but our minds is all we have. So our experience of the world. So when you think about what you're seeing outside, or you're seeing me on the screen, I'm seeing this nice, beautiful tree outside, and so on. All of that is coming to me through the lens of my mind. It's coming to me through the filter of my mind. And I like to think of it as like wearing sunglasses. When you're wearing glasses, it's like adds a layer of something. And similar is true with our minds. We don't see reality directly, we see it through our minds. And all of happiness and suffering happens in that layer. Like there's nothing objectively bad or good about the tree, but I think it's beautiful because it's interpreted by my mind as such. And so the key insight about a lot of mental health, emotional intelligence, same is true in psychotherapy, same is true in meditation, is to understand that that filter exists and you have control over that filter. So what we try to do is change the world often when we don't feel good. Let's say if a partner is being annoying, we blame the partner and whatever she's annoying or whatever. But a lot of times, what is more useful to do and what you have control over is this filter. And so that I think is the power of emotional intelligence is that it gives you this power to change everything because you change the lens through which you see everything. Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, thanks for having me. It was fun, and I love that you're interested in these absolutely important things, which is like the mind, psychology, personal growth. I love that you had read many of the books that we discussed, um, and all of those references you could get. Love the focus of this podcast, and indeed of what you're thinking. So, acknowledge you for that, and prioritizing health and personal growth and all of that. It's rare, right? We think almost that is normal and everyone does it, but it's not if you think about it. It's like very few people actually actively focus on these things. So yeah, yeah. So and I'm definitely acknowledge you on that. A lot of people ask me, like, oh, how do I start with my emotional intelligence and so on. And I think great place, because I got so many of these questions, what I did was created a quiz, a scorecard that people could just take. It's all free. I got nothing of it. And then it evaluates you on the 5 dimensions that I just talked about earlier. It gives you like a score on how you're doing on each of these dimensions. And then it gives you some suggestions on how to proceed based on your score. So it's something that I'm sure you can post a link somewhere. I'll give you a link up to it. So I think that's a good first step if you really want to focus on your emotional intelligence and your mind. I think that's a great place to start. So I think those are my few parting words. Awesome. Thanks.